Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sotadeology. In today's video, we're going to dissect Sotadeology Lecture 3, the interlocking of dimensions. So in this video, we're going to see how dimensions are interdependent. So with no further ado, let's dive into it. We're going to use this time energy wave model to illustrate the whole thing, while we use this formula of everything to dissect the equilateral triangle that we have right inside the time energy wave model. So now, as you can see, you see that we have this trajectory. But first thing, what I want you to pay attention to is this whole region that we have up here is the classical realm, while this down region is the quantum realm. So we use this formula of everything to activate the unification of quantum mechanics to classical mechanics. And so we're going to use that in this video to explain the interlocking of dimensions. So we're going to talk more about degeneracy and then talk about the eigenvalues and vector as they are related to this particular time energy wave model and this formula of everything. Now, the first thing I want you to first of all get to know is that I want us to dissect the bottleneck of time's mystery, which is relativity of simultaneity. So now, when you want to define the now, as in you want to define the global now, while still maintaining the relativity for you to have the past phenomenon and the future phenomenon, it is difficult to have a global now. But that is being solved by applying this formula of everything, and we're going to see how we're able to solve that. Now, the first thing we're going to do is that, let's say we use this electron's mass word in the place of this m and in the place of this m. We will get the counterpart, the classical counterpart, which is going to be this particular value. So now, when we substitute this classical mass word in the place of this m and this m, it will take us back by annihilating the zeros manually to this electron's mass. But instead of having the minus raised power minus 31, we're going to have raised power minus 32. And that shows the decaying factor of that transition into the black hole. So now, when we now talk about dimensions, we know that this is going to be our two dimensions, which is 2D. So now, when we have the generation of 2D, we're going to have 1D. So definitely 1D is interlocked to 2D. So now when we have this 2D, the generacy of this 2D will be reduced to 1D. And so that is telling us that 1D is interlocked with 2D. So how do we get this? When we have a circle which is 2D, the degeneracy of this circle can actually go straight down to singularity, and by so doing it will boycott the 1D. So the essence of having constancy for us to have this equilateral triangle is for us to have the effect of degeneracy as it ought to be, which has to be from 2D down to 1D, then down to singularity, as the case may be. Then for us to have degeneracy down to a singularity, we know that if this serves as our 1D, which is from this evolutionary singularity to the singularity of the black hole, if that is our 1D, there is no way we can have degeneracy if we have the singularity of this black hole to be the same thing as the singularity of the evolutionary singularity. You understand? So now we know by the previous lectures that the nature of this evolutionary singularity is energy density, while this one is mass density. So basically, the two singularities are different from each other, and so we can have degeneracy even from one singularity down to the other singularity. So now, before I go to that relativity of simultaneity, I want us to first of all dissect the essence of this equilateral triangle. Like I was saying, when we now substitute this classical mass words into this formula, we're going to have this real classical mass word here. And if you look at this time energy wave model, the real quantum mass word is outside the time energy wave model. That buttresses the fact that the electromagnetic field, that one is made up of photons, and we know that photons are massless. And this actually buttresses that by suspending the real mass worth of electron or positron in this case outside the time energy wave model. So right now, by the time we now have this suspension at the classical level, while substituting the classical mass worth, there is going to be reaction of that, which is going to be this constancy of light. And the constancy that we have here is the constancy of gravity. So now, how do we get this central line? That is, the central line represents the present, and it serves as the global now. How can we now have the global now while still maintaining relativity? Just as in the case of the merging of space and time, it is difficult to have this global now. But this global now that we have is in form of field. And that field is a kind of field that is static and undulating. And when you have field, you can have the exact position of things based on direction. So we can say that here, this expansion phase of the universe, it has a field. We can interpret this to be a field. And that field is a kind of field that propagates outwards, while the field that we have in the black hole is the kind of field that propagates inwards. So the central field will now serve as field that is static and undulating. Now that we interpret this present phase to be a field, we can have a global now. And for us to have that global now, the symmetric nature of the universe has to be broken. And that is why we say that the instant trajectory of time at this central line is far more than the constraint of that symmetry. And that is why we have it extending to connect to the real mass world, which is outside even the time energy wave model. So by having that, it simply means that this 2D is dependent on 3D. And so we can have the degeneracy of 3D to be 2D, and so we have our 3D right here. The degeneracy of 3D will reduce to 2D, and then 2D will reduce to 1D. The reason we are able to have this is for the fact that we have the constancy of gravity and the constancy of light in such a way that they both maintain regularized momentum. And it is that same regularized momentum that we have even in the nucleus, such that the compactness nature of the nucleus has a kind of highly energetic momentum that is moving at a constant speed to suspend that nucleus such that the nucleus will not be able to, collapse into the singularity. So that is that. So now we now know that for us to have global now, the time trajectory has to be more than the symmetric nature of the universe, and we must have a spontaneous symmetry breaking at the quantum level to connect to the real quantum mass world. And so by having that 2D dependent, having that 2D to be dependent on the 3D, we can as well have, the conscious nature or the consciousness. We can interpret that as consciousness for, human phenomenon. So right now, when we now look at this, we see that basically when you are to interpret relativity in terms of distance, and if the distance is so vast, there is no way you can have global now, because the now for that other observer at the distance will be interpreted as the past, depending on how, or depending on the direction. Direction. So if the other observer is moving away from the initial observer, then the now of that other observer will actually go into the past of this present, the initial observer. Then if the observer, the other observer is actually approaching the initial observer, then the now of that other observer will actually go into the future of the initial observer. But there is a particular point where we have a kind of synchronized momentum, such that we have this field of reality, which is static and undulating field, and that is where the whole reality of the universe is. So now, another thing I want to briefly talk about is the eigenvalue. We know that when you have a negative real value for eigenvalue, then the interpretation of that will mean that the quantum system is stable, which means that it degenerates down to the singularity. But if we now have a positive value for eigenvalue, then it means that it spreads out from singularity and then it becomes unstable. So basically, we have the stability being maintained by the virtue of constancy, and that is why we have the speed of light to be constant and then the speed of gravity to be constant to maintain that trajectory. So the essence of having the equilateral triangle is for us to maintain degeneracy the way it ought to be, which is to go from 3D to 2D down to 1D. But in the case of circle or sphere, then 1D can be boycotted such that degeneracy will go straight to the singularity. And with that, we'll not be able to have the clear picture of what is actually happening. So that is that. So by applying this formula of everything, we're able to have this equilateral triangle, and that is being flipped at the present phase by connecting to the positron. And by the virtue of this suspension, there will be a radiation that will cause a hole, just like Dirac said that there must be a hole in the sea of the Dirac to convert the electron there to be positron. And when we have that positron, there will be that flipping mechanism. And by having this positron injected into the system, we can have momentum into the black hole. So we only have a tiny, very slight, brief static nature at the present phase. So any further application of this formula of everything will show the effect of that momentum into the black hole. Just like I said the other time, when we substitute the electron's mass, what that is what we know. We put it right here. At first instance, we're able to get this classical counterpart. Now, by using this classical counterpart to reconnect to our positron, we realize that instead of having raised power minus 31, we have raised power minus 32. And that shows that the momentum has gone into the future. So we can only get, because we are traversing the quantum realm the second time, so this suspension must be broken. It will generate radiation, and effect of the radiation will resort to decay. And that is that about it. So I believe this is quite informative. If you like the video for real, don't hesitate to like the video by clicking the like button. Then make sure you subscribe to this channel. I will put the link to my research publication in the description below. You can click on that to explore and to use the formula of everything to get this fact that I'm sharing with you. Thank you. God bless you.